The silver ships appeared over every major city on Earth at exactly noon, Greenwich Mean Time. No radar had detected them. No satellite had seen them coming. They simply materialized in the sky like ghosts becoming solid, their hulls reflecting sunlight in ways that hurt to look at directly. Dr. Rebecca Hayes pressed her face against the laboratory window, watching the massive vessel hovering above New York City. 3 days had passed since their arrival, and the aliens had finally agreed to meet with human representatives. As Earth's lead xenobiologist, she would be part of the first official contact team. "Still can't believe they're real," muttered Captain Alex Rivera, adjusting his dress uniform. The former military officer had been chosen to represent Earth's defense forces, though everyone hoped there would be no need for such considerations. Rebecca nodded, still staring at the ship. 5 different species, they said. A coalition of civilized worlds here to welcome us into the galactic community. She turned to face him. "Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it?" The meeting took place in the United Nations building. Ambassador David Cross, a career diplomat with silver hair and steady hands, led the human delegation. Rebecca sat beside him, her recording equipment ready to document this historic moment. Rivera stood at attention near the wall with other security personnel. The alien delegation entered through a shimmering portal that appeared in the center of the room. 5 beings stepped through, each representing a different species from their coalition. The leader was tall and thin with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Its voice came through a translation device that made it sound oddly mechanical. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am Counselor Prime of the Hegemony Coalition. We have observed your species for some time and have come to offer guidance." Ambassador Cross stood and bowed slightly. "Welcome to Earth, Counselor Prime. We are honored by your presence and eager to learn about the galaxy beyond our world." "Yes," the alien said, its black eyes studying the humans carefully. "You have much to learn. Your species shows concerning traits that require correction." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. Something in the alien's tone suggested this was not going to be the peaceful first contact humanity had hoped for. Cross maintained his diplomatic smile. "We are always open to learning and improving. What concerns you about our species?" Counselor Prime activated a device and holographic images filled the room. Earth's history played out in fast motion. Wars, revolutions, acts of defiance against authority. Your species refuses to accept proper order. You fight against natural hierarchy. This is dangerous behavior that cannot be tolerated in civilized space. "I'm sorry," Cross said carefully, "but I don't understand. Are you saying that our desire for freedom and self-determination is somehow wrong?"
"Freedom is chaos," another alien spoke, this one covered in scales.
"Order is peace. Your species will submit to coalition authority and accept guidance, or you will be classified as a threat to galactic stability." Rivera stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. "Are you threatening us?" All 5 aliens turned their attention to him, and Rebecca could see something like amusement in their expressions. Counselor Prime spoke again. "Threat no, human. We are offering salvation. Your species has 30 standard time units to comply. You will surrender all weapons, submit to our administrative control, and accept relocation to designated worlds where you can be properly supervised." Ambassador Cross's diplomatic composure finally cracked. "You're asking us to become your slaves. We are offering you survival," the scaled alien replied. "Your species will serve the greater good of galactic civilization. This is not negotiable." Rebecca stood up, her scientific mind racing. "What if we refuse?" Counselor Prime's forearms spread wide in what might have been a gesture of finality. "Then you will be reclassified as a Category 5. Existential risk. Such classifications require immediate resolution for the safety of all civilized species." The room fell silent except for the hum of recording equipment. Ambassador Cross looked around at his team, seeing the same realization in their eyes that he felt in his heart. This was not first contact. This was an ultimatum. "We need time to consult with our governments," Cross said finally. "You have 30 time units," Counselor Prime repeated. "Choose wisely, humans." The aliens stepped back through their portal, leaving the human delegation alone in the suddenly too quiet room. Rivera was the first to speak. "They're going to attack us no matter what we decide, aren't they?" Rebecca nodded grimly. "They've already made up their minds. We're too unpredictable for their ordered galaxy. They can't risk letting us spread. Cross slumped into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 65 years. Then we need to prepare for war with beings who have technology we can barely understand. Maybe, Rebecca said, her voice gaining strength. But they don't understand us either. They see our refusal to bow down as a flaw. They think they can break us with superior firepower. Rivera checked his weapon and smiled grimly. They've never met humans who have nothing left to lose. 27 hours later, the first orbital bombardment began. The silver ships opened fire on major population centers, their weapons turning buildings to glass and metal to vapor. But even as the attacks rained down, something unexpected happened. Humans didn't surrender. They didn't beg for mercy. They picked up whatever weapons they could find and fought back. Emergency broadcasts spread across all remaining communication networks, carrying the same message from city to city, continent to continent. They want us to kneel. They want us to accept chains, but we are human, and we bow to no one. In underground bunkers and hidden shelters, resistance cells began forming. Rebecca Hayes found herself leading a group of scientists working to understand alien technology from the wreckage of attacks. Alex Rivera coordinated with military units that had survived the initial strikes, organizing guerrilla operations against the occupying forces. The coalition had expected quick submission from a primitive species. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that grew more determined with each attack. Where other species might break under pressure, humans seemed to become stronger. As the first week of bombardment ended, Counselor Prime received reports that confused and frustrated the coalition leadership. The humans were not surrendering. They were adapting. They were learning. And most troubling of all, they were fighting back with a ferocity that suggested they would rather die free than live as slaves. The coalition had wanted to break humanity. Instead, they had given humans something they had never truly had before: a common enemy and a shared purpose that would unite them like nothing else ever could. Emergency klaxons wailed across the Luna City shipyard as another wave of coalition destroyers approached Earth's moon. Sam Chen worked frantically at the control panel, trying to get the last evacuation ship ready for launch. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cold, recycled air of the facility. "How much longer?" shouted Rebecca Hayes over the noise. She had been helping coordinate the evacuation for 3 months now, ever since the coalition began systematically destroying human settlements across the solar system. 2 more minutes for the FTL drive to charge, Sam called back, his hands dancing across the controls. "But I don't know if we have 2 minutes. Through the massive bay doors, they could see coalition ships moving between the orbital defense platforms like sharks among minnows. Earth hung in the distance, its surface still glowing with fires from the ongoing bombardment. Over 2 billion humans had already died, but the coalition seemed disappointed that humanity hadn't simply given up. "Transport 7 is away," announced Captain Rivera through the communication system. He had been coordinating the evacuation from a command bunker deep beneath the lunar surface. That's the last of the Mars colony refugees. Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and despair. They had managed to save maybe 50 million humans scattered across dozens of ships, but that was barely 2% of Earth's population. The rest were either dead or trapped on the dying planet below. "FTL drive is ready," Sam announced. "Where are we going?" Rebecca looked at the star charts displayed on the screen. The coalition controlled most of the nearby systems, and they had been hunting down human ships with systematic efficiency. "Pick the farthest system we can reach. Somewhere they won't expect us to go." Sam nodded and began entering coordinates for a system nearly 800 light-years away. It was risky. That far out, there was no guarantee they would find habitable worlds or the resources needed to survive. But staying close to Earth meant certain death. The ship lurched as it launched from the dock, joining a small fleet of other evacuation vessels fleeing the solar system. Behind them, Luna City erupted in flames as coalition forces finished their work. 3 years later, Rebecca stood on the observation deck of New Hope Station, watching the sun set over the alien landscape of Kepler 438c. The planet was barely habitable, too cold, too little oxygen, and storms that could strip the skin from a person's body, but it was theirs. Around her, the descendants of Earth's refugees had built something remarkable: The station itself was a patchwork of salvaged ship parts and alien technology they had managed to reverse engineer. Below on the planet's surface, underground cities housed nearly 1 million humans who had learned to thrive in conditions that would have killed them just a few years earlier. The supply convoy from the Ross system just arrived, reported Sam, who had become the station's chief engineer. They brought good news and bad news. Rebecca turned away from the observation window. Give me the good news first. The settlement on Ross 128B has successfully defended against 3 coalition attacks. They've developed new shielding technology by combining human engineering with captured enemy equipment. And the bad news? Sam's expression darkened. The coalition found the New Eden colony in the Alpha Centauri system. 4 million people. They didn't just destroy the settlement. They glassed the entire planet to make sure nothing could ever grow there again. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of grief that had become a constant companion. Every victory came with the news of another loss, another group of humans who had died rather than surrender. There's something else, Sam continued. The survivors from New Eden managed to transmit data before the end. They discovered something important about how coalition technology works. He activated a holographic display, showing technical diagrams that Rebecca had learned to read over the past few years. Their ships and weapons all operate on predictable patterns. They're incredibly advanced, but they lack adaptability. Once they commit to a strategy, they can't change it quickly. Rebecca studied the information, her scientific mind working through the implications. That's their weakness. They expect other species to behave predictably, too. They can't understand why we keep fighting when logic says we should surrender. Captain Rivera thinks we can use this against them, Sam said. He's been working with the other settlement commanders to develop new tactics. As if summoned by their conversation, Rivera's image appeared on the communication screen. The former military officer looked older and more scarred than when they had first met, but his eyes still held the same determination. Rebecca, Sam, good to see you. I'm calling an emergency conference of all settlement leaders. We've got intelligence that the coalition is planning something big. Rebecca leaned forward. How big? They're massing forces for what they're calling the final solution. Apparently, our refusal to die quietly has become an embarrassment to them. They want to end the human problem once and for all. Sam shook his head. We're scattered across hundreds of systems. How could they possibly find all of us? They don't need to find all of us, Rivera replied grimly. They just need to make an example that's horrible enough to break the will of any survivors. Intelligence suggests they're targeting the largest settlements first. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. New Hope Station has one of the largest populations outside the core systems, which is why we need to talk strategy. The coalition expects us to run and hide like we have been. Maybe it's time to do something they won't expect. Over the next several hours, settlement leaders from across human space joined the conference. There was Maria Santos from the ice mines of Wolf 359, David Park from the underground cities of Proxima Centauri, and dozens of others who had carved out new homes in the most unlikely places. The debate was fierce. Some wanted to scatter further, becoming nomads among the stars. Others argued for better hiding places, deeper underground or in the void between systems. But gradually, a different consensus began to emerge. We've been running for 3 years, said Commander Torres from the Barnard star system. Every time we find a new home, they eventually find us and destroy it. Maybe Rivera is right. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting back. With what? Demanded Dr. Kim from the research station orbiting Tau Ceti. They have thousands of ships and weapons that can destroy planets. We have salvage and desperation, Rebecca spoke up. We have something they don't understand. We have the ability to adapt and change. Every attack they've made has taught us something new about their technology and tactics. She activated displays showing technical data collected from dozens of battles across human space. Look at this. Every time they attack, they use the same formations, the same timing, the same strategies. They're so confident in their superiority that they've become predictable. Rivera nodded approvingly. The question is, are we ready to bet everything on one coordinated strike? The debate continued deep into the night, but gradually the scattered voices of humanity began to unite around a single, desperate plan. They would stop running. They would stop hiding. Instead, they would do something the coalition would never expect. They would attack first. As the conference ended and leaders began coordinating with their settlements, Rebecca remained at her station looking out at the alien sunset. Tomorrow they would begin preparing for a battle that would either free humanity or destroy what remained of their species. But for the first time since the evacuation from Earth, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The captured Coalition patrol ship hung motionless in the asteroid field, its hull scarred by human weapons that should never have been able to penetrate its shields. Inside the cargo bay, Rebecca Hayes carefully examined the alien technology, while Sam Chen worked to integrate their salvage systems with human engineering. "This doesn't make sense," Rebecca muttered, running her scanner over a damaged power coupling. "Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, but it's designed like a machine built by committee. Everything has backups and redundancies, but no flexibility." Sam looked up from the navigation computer he was trying to crack. Maybe that's how their society works too. Everything planned, everything predictable, no room for individual thinking. It had been 8 months since the human settlements had begun coordinating their resistance efforts. The Coalition, expecting quick victory over scattered refugees, instead found themselves facing an enemy that learned from every encounter and adapted faster than their rigid command structure could respond to. "Got it," Sam announced as the navigation computer finally yielded its secrets. "This ship's patrol route covers 17 systems. More importantly, it shows the location of their supply depot in the Vega system." Rebecca smiled grimly. "Captain Rivera is going to like this information." Their conversation was interrupted by a new voice speaking heavily accented English. "Your people continue to surprise us." Both humans turned to see their newest ally approaching through the ship's corridor. Kor was a member of the Talon species, reptilian beings who had been conquered by the Coalition over a century ago. His people served as infantry troops, considered expendable by their masters. "In over 100 years of Coalition rule," Kor continued, "no species has ever captured one of their patrol vessels intact. Most surrender after losing their homeworld. Those who resist are destroyed within months." Sam wiped grease from his hands and stood up. "We're not most species." "No," Kor agreed, his scaled face showing what might have been amusement. "You are either the bravest or the most foolish beings in the galaxy. Perhaps both." Rebecca had worked with Kor for several weeks now, ever since his Coalition unit had attempted to assault New Hope Station. Unlike other Coalition forces they had encountered, Kor's unit had included unwilling conscripts from conquered species. During the battle, Kor had turned on his Coalition commanders and helped the humans win. "What can you tell us about this supply depot?" Rebecca asked, showing him the navigation data. Kor studied the information carefully. "Vega Depot supplies the entire Outer Rim patrol fleet. It is heavily defended by automated systems and a full battle group. Attacking it would be suicide." "Good thing we're not planning to attack it," Sam said with a grin. "We're planning to steal from it." Over the next several days, human settlements across the galaxy received detailed intelligence about Coalition supply lines, patrol routes, and defensive systems. The information came from captured ships, defecting alien soldiers like Kor, and increasingly sophisticated human reconnaissance missions. Captain Rivera had established a mobile command center aboard a converted colony ship that moved constantly between systems, coordinating what had become a galaxy-wide guerrilla war. His latest briefing was being transmitted to resistance leaders across human space. "The Coalition has divided their forces to hunt us down," Rivera explained, his image flickering on communication screens in dozens of hidden bases. "They expect us to keep running and hiding. Instead, we're going to hit them where they least expect it, their supply lines." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than trying to fight the Coalition's massive battle fleets directly, human forces would target the infrastructure that kept those fleets operational. Fuel depots, repair facilities, supply convoys, and communication relays would all become targets. "Remember," Rivera continued, "we're not trying to defeat them in pitched battle. We're trying to make them adapt faster than their command structure can handle. Every time they change tactics to counter us, we change ours first." The first coordinated strikes began simultaneously across 30 systems. Human ships, many of them cobbled together from salvaged parts and barely spaceworthy, struck at targets the Coalition had never thought to defend heavily. Rebecca found herself aboard the ghost ship Defiance, a vessel that Sam had equipped with stealth technology reverse-engineered from Coalition patrol craft. Their target was a communication relay that coordinated Coalition movements across an entire sector. "Approaching the target," announced Commander Torres, who had volunteered to lead the mission. "No sign we've been detected." Through the view screen, Rebecca could see the massive relay station orbiting a dead moon. It was clearly automated. With minimal defenses, the Coalition had never imagined that primitive humans could penetrate so deeply into their territory. "Initiating data extraction," Rebecca reported, working at her console. "I'm downloading their entire communication archive. This should give us intelligence on Coalition movements for the next 6 months." "How long?" Torres asked, watching her sensors for any sign of approaching enemy ships. 3 more minutes, Rebecca replied. Then her console chimed with an unexpected discovery. "Wait, there's something else here. Encrypted communications from Coalition High Command." As the data downloaded, Rebecca began to understand the scope of what they had stumbled upon. The Coalition wasn't just hunting humans. They were dealing with unrest across their entire territory. Species that had been conquered decades ago were beginning to rebel, inspired by humanity's refusal to surrender. "They're scared," Rebecca said in amazement. "The Coalition leadership is actually scared. Our resistance is giving other species hope that they can fight back too." The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just survived the Coalition's attempt at extermination. They had started a galaxy-wide revolution simply by refusing to give up. "Extraction complete," Rebecca announced. "Let's get out of here before they realize what we've taken." As the Defiant slipped away into hyperspace, similar scenes were playing out across Coalition territory. Supply convoys vanished without trace. Fuel depots exploded in carefully timed chain reactions. Communication networks went dark as human saboteurs struck at the infrastructure holding the Coalition together. But the most significant victory came in the Altair system, where a human raiding force encountered something unexpected. A Coalition prison ship carrying thousands of captured beings from a dozen different species. The rescue operation was led by Alex Rivera personally, commanding a small fleet of human vessels against overwhelming odds. The prison ship was heavily guarded, but its defenses were designed to keep prisoners in, not attackers out. "All prisoners secured," reported the boarding team leader as human forces evacuated the ship. "We've got refugees from 8 different species here. Some of them have been imprisoned for decades." Among the rescued prisoners was a being who would change everything, a former Coalition scientist named Dr. Vash, whose people had been conquered 50 years earlier. Vash brought with him detailed knowledge of Coalition technology and, more importantly, the locations of similar prison ships throughout the galaxy. "Your species," Vash told Rivera during the debriefing, "has accomplished something remarkable. You have shown the galaxy that the Coalition can be fought, that they can be beaten." Rivera studied the alien scientist carefully. "Are you saying other species are ready to join the fight?" "I am saying," Vash replied, "that the Coalition's greatest weakness is not their technology or their tactics. It is their belief that conquered species will always remain conquered. You have proven that belief wrong." Within weeks, the rescued prisoners had returned to their homeworlds carrying news of human victories and Coalition defeats. The galaxy began to stir as species that had accepted subjugation for generations started to remember what freedom felt like. The Coalition had tried to break humanity's spirit through overwhelming force. Instead, they had created exactly what they had feared most, a species that refused to accept defeat and inspired others to fight for their freedom. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the first silver ships had appeared over Earth, humanity was not just surviving. They were winning. 8-year-old Lisa was born in the void between stars, and she could navigate 3-dimensional space in her mind better than most adults could read a map. Her parents had been refugees from the Mars colonies, and she had never seen a planet's surface. To her, home was the converted cargo ship Endurance, and the stars were as familiar as streets. "Lisa, come help me with this calculation," called Dr. Rebecca Hayes from the ship's improvised laboratory. The girl floated over in the zero gravity, her movements graceful and precise in ways that still amazed the older generation of humans. Rebecca was working on modifications to their quantum communication system, trying to coordinate with human settlements scattered across the galaxy. The war had been raging for 5 years now, and humanity had changed in ways that even she, as a scientist, found remarkable. The signal is degrading after 15 light years, Rebecca explained, showing Lisa the equations on her tablet. What do you think is causing the interference? Lisa studied the data with the focused attention that had become common among children born during the war. Resource scarcity had eliminated formal education, but these young humans learned by necessity, absorbing knowledge with an intensity their peacetime ancestors had never needed. The quantum field fluctuations follow a pattern, Lisa said after a moment. It looks like the coalition is using dampening technology to disrupt our communications. Rebecca nodded approvingly. The girl had grasped in minutes what had taken Rebecca hours to figure out. These war-born children thought differently, their minds shaped by constant challenge and adaptation. Across the ship, similar scenes were playing out. In the engineering section, Sam Chen worked with teenagers who had been designing starship modifications since they were 10 years old. Their innovations often surpassed anything the older generation could conceive. Combining human creativity with intimate knowledge of alien technology, the new drive design is ready for testing, announced Maya, a 17-year-old who had been orphaned during the evacuation from Earth. She had spent her entire remembered life working with salvaged coalition technology, and her understanding of their systems was instinctive rather than learned. Sam reviewed her modifications to their faster-than-light drive. This could increase our jump range by 40%. How did you solve the power distribution problem? Maya pointed to a series of connections that seemed chaotic but somehow worked. The coalition builds everything in straight lines and perfect patterns. But if you let the energy flow follow natural curves, it's more efficient. This was the new human way. Improvisation born from necessity. Innovation driven by survival. The coalition's systematic approach to warfare had become predictable, while human tactics evolved constantly as children who had never known peace brought fresh perspectives to every problem. The communication system chimed with an incoming message from Captain Rivera, who had established the fortress world of Haven Prime in a system the coalition had written off as uninhabitable. The planet's surface was ravaged by radiation storms, but deep underground, humans had built a city that housed over 2 million people. All settlement leaders, we have a problem. Rivera's voice carried the weight of exhaustion. He had aged visibly during the war, but his determination remained unshaken. Coalition High Command has issued new orders. They're calling it the Purification Protocol. Rebecca felt a familiar chill. Every time the coalition escalated their tactics, it meant more human settlements would burn. What are they planning? Asked Commander Park from the deep space mining operation in the Kuiper Belt. Total biological warfare, Rivera replied grimly. They've developed viruses designed to target human DNA specifically. They're planning to release them into the atmosphere of every world we've settled. The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Vash, the former coalition scientist who had become one of humanity's most valuable allies. The biological weapons are designed for standard human genetics, he said. But your species has been adapting to different environments for years now. Rebecca suddenly understood what he meant. The humans who had lived on high-radiation worlds had developed resistance to cellular damage. Those born in zero gravity had different bone density and muscle structure. Colony worlds with different atmospheric mixtures had produced humans with modified lung capacity and blood chemistry. We're not the same species we were 5 years ago, Rebecca said slowly. The coalition is trying to fight an enemy that no longer exists. This realization led to one of the most desperate gambits in human history. Rather than hiding from the biological weapons, human settlements would deliberately expose themselves to determine which populations had developed immunity. The results were both horrifying and hopeful. 60% of humans showed some resistance to the coalition viruses, but the cost of discovery was measured in millions of lives. Entire settlements volunteered to be test subjects, knowing that their sacrifice might save others. But even this catastrophe became a source of strength. The survivors didn't just resist the viruses, they studied them, learning to create countermeasures and eventually turning coalition biological weapons into tools for human advancement. Lisa, now working as a full researcher despite her age, made the breakthrough that changed everything. The viruses aren't just targeting human DNA, she announced during a research conference. They're designed to prevent genetic adaptation. The coalition uses them to keep conquered species from evolving beyond their control. Dr. Vash confirmed her analysis. Every species under coalition rule has been subjected to genetic suppression for decades. That's why they never rebel successfully. They're prevented from adapting to new circumstances. Rebecca felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. But we've been adapting anyway. Our children are already beyond what the coalition considers possible for a primitive species. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just survived the coalition's attempts at extermination, they had evolved past them. The children born during the war possessed capabilities that their parents couldn't even fully understand. This became evident during the siege of Haven Prime, when a coalition fleet of over 300 ships attempted to destroy humanity's largest remaining stronghold. The battle should have been a massacre, but the defenders included a generation of humans who thought in ways their enemies couldn't predict. Maya led a squadron of fighters that moved through space like they were swimming through water, their intuitive understanding of three-dimensional combat, allowing them to outmaneuver ships with superior technology. Young engineers jury-rigged defensive systems that responded to attacks faster than coalition computers could process targeting data. Most remarkably, children like Lisa served as living computers, coordinating defensive systems with mental calculations that surpassed artificial intelligence. They had been forced to develop these abilities by necessity, but they represented a new stage of human evolution. The siege lasted for 3 months. When it ended, the coalition fleet had been completely destroyed and Haven Prime remained unconquered. But more importantly, the battle had been broadcast across the galaxy, showing other species what was possible when a people refused to accept limitations. "We didn't just win a battle," Rivera announced in his post-siege address. "We proved that evolution doesn't wait for permission. The coalition tried to break us, but instead they forced us to become something stronger." Rebecca watched from the observation deck as relief ships from dozens of human settlements arrived at Haven Prime. Each vessel carried refugees who had been shaped by their own unique challenges. Humans adapted to Arctic worlds, desert planets, gas giant mining operations, and the vacuum of space itself. They were no longer the species that had first encountered the coalition's ultimatum. The war had forged them into something new, something that refused to be conquered because they had learned to become unconquerable. The coalition had wanted to eliminate humanity to protect their ordered galaxy. Instead, they had created exactly what they feared most, a species that grew stronger under pressure and refused to accept that any limitation was permanent. The forge of adversity had done its work. Now it was time to see what these new humans could accomplish when they stopped merely surviving and started fighting to win. The Talon homeworld had been under coalition control for over a century, its people serving as soldiers in wars they never chose to fight. But on the day human ships appeared in their system, everything changed. Commander Torres led the Liberation Fleet's first major offensive into coalition core territory. Unlike the guerrilla raids of previous years, this was a direct assault with a specific goal, not conquest but freedom. "All ships, remember the mission," Torres broadcast to her fleet of captured and modified coalition vessels. "We're not here to destroy their world. We're here to give them a choice." Dr. Kor stood beside her on the bridge of the flagship, his scaled face showing emotions that had been suppressed for decades. "My people have forgotten what choice means," he said quietly. "They may not understand what you're offering." Rebecca Hayes, now serving as the fleet's chief science officer, monitored the communications array. "We're receiving transmissions from the planet's surface. The coalition garrison is mobilizing, but there's something else. Underground broadcasts in the Talon language. The liberation of coalition worlds had become humanity's new strategy. Rather than hiding and running, human forces were striking directly at the systems that held the Galactic Empire together. But they weren't conquering, they were liberating. Sam Chen, who had become the fleet's chief engineer, brought up tactical displays showing the planet's defenses. "The orbital platforms are standard coalition design. We can disable them without causing casualties." This was the human way of war that had evolved over 6 years of conflict. Precision strikes that crippled enemy capabilities while preserving life. It was a philosophy that confused coalition commanders who expected conquered peoples to seek revenge. The battle for the Talon homeworld lasted only hours. Human ships, crewed by beings who had learned to think faster and adapt quicker than their enemies, overwhelmed defenses designed for predictable opponents. But the real victory came when the Coalition garrison surrendered. "This is General Vex of the Coalition 5th Fleet," came the transmission from the planet's surface. "We are prepared to discuss terms of surrender." Torres exchanged glances with Rebecca. In 6 years of war, no Coalition commander had ever offered to surrender. They usually fought to the death or retreated to fight another day. "Tell him we'll meet on the planet's surface," Torres decided, but not to discuss surrender terms. To discuss freedom. The meeting took place in the capital city of the Talon homeworld, in a building that had once housed their planetary government before the Coalition conquest. Hundreds of Talon civilians gathered outside, many of them seeing humans for the first time. General Vex was a member of the Apex species, the Coalition's ruling race. He stood over 7 feet tall with pale blue skin and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. But there was something different in his eyes. Uncertainty. "You have achieved a tactical victory," Vex said as the human delegation entered the chamber. "State your terms for occupation." Torres sat down across from him, her manner calm and respectful. "We're not here to occupy your world, General. We're here to return it to its rightful owners." The confusion on Vex's face was evident. "I don't understand. You defeated our forces. By all conventions of warfare, you now control this system." Rebecca leaned forward. "General, can I ask you a question? In all your years of service, have you ever wondered what the Talon people actually want?" Vex stared at her as if she had asked an incomprehensible question. "Want? They are a conquered species. Their wants are irrelevant to galactic order." "That's where you're wrong," said Dr. Core, speaking for the first time. "We've never stopped wanting freedom. We've just forgotten how to ask for it." The discussion that followed lasted for days and changed the course of the war. General Vex, like many Coalition officers, had never questioned the system he served. The idea that conquered species might have preferences, dreams, or desires beyond following orders was genuinely foreign to him. But as he witnessed the transformation of his garrison, Coalition soldiers working alongside Talon civilians to rebuild war damage, former enemies sharing resources and knowledge, something fundamental shifted in his understanding. "Your species doesn't make sense," Vex told Torres during one of their conversations. "You have the power to rule, but you choose to liberate. You could take revenge, but you offer forgiveness. How do you maintain order without absolute authority?" Torres smiled. "We don't maintain order, General. We create cooperation. There's a difference." The liberation of the Talon homeworld became a template for human operations across Coalition space. World after world fell not to conquest but to liberation, as human forces offered something the galaxy had forgotten was possible: genuine freedom. But the most significant victory came when the Hegemony Dominion, the Coalition's most powerful member species, began internal negotiations about switching sides. Ambassador Prime Keth had ruled the Dominion for over 2 centuries, guiding his people's expansion across the galaxy through careful alliance with the Coalition. But the human rebellion had created cracks in the foundation of galactic order that could no longer be ignored. "The humans have proven that our assumptions about lesser species were incorrect," Keth admitted during a closed session of the Dominion Council. "They have adapted beyond our projections and inspired resistance movements across 17 sectors." Councillor Nash, a hardliner who had advocated for humanity's complete extermination, disagreed. "They are an aberration. Once we commit sufficient resources, they can still be eliminated." "At what cost?" asked Councillor Vera, representing the younger generation of Dominion leadership. "We have lost over 40% of our fleet strength fighting these primitives. Meanwhile, species we conquered decades ago are declaring independence." Rebecca received word of these discussions through intelligence networks that now spanned the galaxy. The Coalition was fracturing from within, as member species questioned the wisdom of continuing a war that had already lasted longer than any previous conflict in galactic history. "They're scared," Rebecca told Rivera during their regular strategic conference. "For the first time in their civilization's history, they're facing an enemy they can't understand or predict." Rivera, now serving as Supreme Commander of all human forces, studied the tactical reports with satisfaction. "Good. Fear makes them make mistakes, and every mistake gives other species more time to remember what freedom looks like." The breakthrough came when the Dominion secretly contacted human leadership to propose a separate peace. Ambassador Prime Keth himself transmitted the message. offering to withdraw Dominion forces from the war in exchange for human assistance in reforming galactic government. We propose the formation of a new alliance, Keth's message stated, one based on voluntary cooperation rather than enforced hierarchy. Your species has demonstrated that such cooperation is not only possible but more effective than our current system. Torres brought the proposal to a council of liberated worlds, dozens of species that had thrown off coalition rule with human assistance. The debate was intense as many wanted to continue fighting until the coalition was completely destroyed. But Rebecca argued for acceptance. This isn't about revenge, she reminded the assembly. It's about creating something better than what came before. The Dominion is offering to help build a galaxy where no species is forced to bow to another. Dr. Vash, now representing the coalition scientists who had defected to the human cause, supported her position. The Dominion has the resources and knowledge to help establish stable governments on liberated worlds. Without their cooperation, we face decades of chaos and potential civil wars. The vote was close, but the liberated worlds agreed to accept the Dominion's proposal. Within weeks, Dominion fleets began withdrawing from coalition territory, taking with them nearly half of the Empire's military strength. The message this sent to the galaxy was unmistakable. The coalition was no longer invincible. Species that had submitted to their rule for centuries began to question whether submission was really necessary. On Haven Prime, now serving as the capital of liberated space, Rebecca stood in the observation deck watching as ships from dozens of different species arrived for the first interspecies cooperation conference. The gathering represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a voluntary alliance based on mutual respect rather than enforced hierarchy. Hard to believe it all started with humans being too stubborn to surrender, Sam commented, joining her at the observation window. Rebecca smiled, thinking back to that first terrible day when the silver ships had appeared over Earth. Maybe that's our real gift to the galaxy. We taught them that surrender is always a choice, not an inevitability. Below them, representatives from over 50 species worked together to draft the charter for a new galactic government, one that would be based on cooperation rather than conquest, freedom rather than fear. The coalition had tried to break humanity to preserve their ordered galaxy. Instead, humanity had broken their order to create something better, a galaxy where every species could choose its own destiny. The surrender ceremony took place in the ruins of Geneva, on a planet Earth that was slowly healing from 7 years of war. Counselor Prime stood before the assembled representatives of 100 worlds, his 4 arms trembling as he prepared to sign documents that would end the coalition's 1,000-year reign. Rebecca Hayes watched from the gallery, thinking about how much had changed since that first terrible meeting in the United Nations building. The scared xenobiologist who had documented humanity's first contact was now the elected president of the Galactic Federation Council, chosen by species from across the galaxy who had learned to trust human judgment. "This is not a surrender," Counselor Prime said, his mechanical translation device making his words seem hollow. "This is an acknowledgement that the old ways of governance are no longer sustainable." Captain Rivera, now Fleet Admiral of the Federation Defense Force, accepted the formal documents. His hair had gone completely gray during the war, and scars marked his face from battles that should have killed him, but his eyes still held the same determination that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. "The Galactic Federation accepts the coalition's surrender," Rivera announced, "but we reject any terms that would place your people under our authority. The age of forced submission is over." This was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of humanity's victory. They had won a war for survival and chosen not to become conquerors themselves. Instead of enslaving their former enemies, they offered them membership in a new type of galactic government based on voluntary cooperation. Dr. Vash, now serving as the Federation's chief science advisor, had worked for months to design the transition process. Former coalition worlds would be given 3 choices: join the Federation as equal members, remain independent with guaranteed protection, or form their own alliances with Federation support. The human concept of choice, Vash had explained to skeptical alien leaders, is not just about freedom to decide. It's about taking responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. This creates stronger, more stable societies than systems based on force. Sam Chen, who had become the Federation's chief technology officer, stood beside the ceremony's most important guest, Lisa Park, the young woman who had been born during humanity's exodus and had grown up to become one of the galaxy's most brilliant minds. At 23, she represented the new generation of humans who would lead the galaxy into its next phase of development. "Hard to believe we're actually here," Sam whispered to her as Counselor Prime signed the final document. Lisa nodded, her enhanced mental capabilities allowing her to process the complex emotions of hundreds of beings in the assembly. "The war is over, but the real work is just beginning." She was right. Ending the coalition was only the first step in creating a truly free galaxy. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds had lived under authoritarian rule for so long that they had forgotten how to govern themselves. The months following the surrender were marked by both triumph and chaos. On some worlds, liberated populations celebrated their freedom and immediately began building democratic institutions. On others, the sudden absence of authority led to confusion and conflict as different groups struggled to fill the power vacuum. Human advisors found themselves in high demand as species after species requested help in establishing stable governments. But these advisors had learned from humanity's own difficult history. They offered guidance, not commands. "We can share what we've learned," Rebecca explained to a gathering of former coalition administrators on the planet Kepler Prime. "But every species must find its own path to freedom. There is no universal solution that works for everyone." This philosophy became the foundation of the Federation's approach to galactic governance. Instead of imposing human values or systems on other species, the Federation served as a forum where different approaches to civilization could coexist and learn from each other. The transformation wasn't always smooth. The Talon homeworld experienced 3 different government changes in 6 months, as different factions competed for leadership. The ice worlds of the former Beta sector descended into civil war when mining guilds couldn't agree on resource distribution. But gradually, stability emerged. Species that had been enemies for centuries learned to cooperate. Technologies that had been hoarded by the coalition were freely shared, leading to innovations that benefited everyone. The most significant change came in how the galaxy viewed conflict itself. The human example had proven that wars didn't have to end with the complete destruction of the losing side. Instead, former enemies could become allies if offered genuine respect and cooperation. Dr. Core, who had been elected as the first Talon representative to the Federation Council, often spoke about this transformation. Before the humans came, victory meant domination and defeat meant extinction. They showed us that victory could mean liberation and defeat could mean a chance to build something better. But perhaps the most profound change was in how species viewed their own potential. The coalition had maintained control by convincing conquered peoples that their subjugation was natural and inevitable. Humanity had proven that nothing was inevitable if people were willing to fight for change. Children across the galaxy grew up hearing stories of the human rebellion, not as tales of military conquest, but as proof that ordinary beings could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept limitations. 5 years after the war's end, Rebecca stood once again in an observation deck, this time aboard Unity Station, the Federation's mobile capital that traveled between member worlds. Through the transparent walls, she could see the construction of humanity's greatest project, New Earth, a completely artificial world being built using technologies shared by dozens of species. The planet would serve as both a memorial to the original Earth and a symbol of what cooperation could achieve. Its forests would contain plants from hundreds of worlds. Its oceans would host life forms that had never shared the same environment, and its cities would be home to beings who had once been mortal enemies. "Sometimes I can barely believe we survived," said a familiar voice behind her. Rebecca turned to see Admiral Rivera approaching, looking more relaxed than she had seen him in years. His duties as fleet commander had ended with the war, and he now served as an advisor to young officers learning to maintain peace rather than fight wars. "We didn't just survive," Rebecca replied. "We grew. All of us." She was thinking not just of humanity, but of all the species that had been transformed by the conflict. The Talon had rediscovered their artistic heritage, creating works of beauty that had been suppressed for generations. The Apex had learned to value cooperation over dominance, becoming skilled mediators between conflicting groups. Even former coalition hardliners had found new purposes in helping establish just governments on liberated worlds. Sam Chen joined them at the observation window, his hair now completely white despite his relatively young age. The stress of 7 years of war followed by 5 years of rebuilding had aged them all, but also given them perspectives that peacetime humans could never have achieved. "The kids want to know if we'll tell them the war stories again," Sam said with a smile. He was referring to the children from dozens of species who lived aboard Unity Station, growing up in an environment where diversity was normal and cooperation was expected. "Which story do they want this time?" Rebecca asked. "The one about the first time we captured a coalition ship. Lisa thinks she can improve on our improvised repairs from back then." Rebecca laughed. Lisa Park was now in charge of the Federation's Advanced Research Division, leading projects that combined human creativity with alien knowledge to achieve things neither could accomplish alone. Her latest proposal involved using controlled black holes as power sources for terraforming dead worlds. "Tell them we'll share the stories," Rebecca said. "But remind them that the most important part isn't how we won the battles. It's what we chose to do after we won." That evening, representatives from across the galaxy gathered in Unity Station's Central Assembly Hall for the weekly Federation Council session. The agenda included infrastructure development for newly liberated worlds, scientific cooperation agreements, and trade negotiations between species that had been isolated from each other for centuries. But before the formal session began, there was a moment of silence for those who had died during the war, humans and aliens alike who had given their lives for the chance to build something better. Rebecca stood before the assembly, looking out at beings whose ancestors had been enemies but who were now working together toward common goals. The sight still amazed her, even after 5 years of peace. "We gather today not as victors and defeated," she began, "but as partners in the greatest experiment in galactic history. We are trying to prove that different species can cooperate without anyone needing to rule over others." Ambassador Prime Keth, now representing the Dominion's voluntary membership in the Federation, nodded approvingly. "The humans taught us that strength comes not from forcing others to submit, but from inspiring them to rise. This is a lesson we must never forget." As the session proceeded, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The war had begun with humanity facing extinction, scattered and outnumbered by enemies who seemed impossible to defeat. It had ended with the creation of a galactic civilization based on principles that most species had thought were impossible to implement. The galaxy had tried to break humans by subjecting them to the ultimate test of survival. Instead, humanity had been forged into something stronger and had used that strength not to dominate others, but to show them that they too could be more than they had ever imagined. Outside Unity Station's windows, the construction of New Earth continued, its growing surface reflecting light from stars that had once seemed impossibly distant. Soon children from across the galaxy would walk on its surface, breathing air created by cooperative effort, and living in cities designed by beings who had learned that their differences were sources of strength, rather than division. The war was over. The old galaxy was dead, but from its ashes something unprecedented had emerged. A civilization where every being could choose their own destiny and help others do the same. Humanity had refused to break when the galaxy tried to forge them in fire. Instead, they had emerged from that forge tempered into something that could help heal the wounds of 1,000 years of conquest, and create hope for a future where freedom was not just possible, but inevitable.